Hi, and welcome to the MacArthur Library Young Adult Read Along. Today we are starting with Chapter 31 of Cinder, read with permission by the publisher. Cinder is written by Marissa Meyer. Chapter 31. It was a long walk home. Adrian Pearl had left the market without her, anxious to get ready for the ball, which had been a relief to Cinder at first. But after the first mile of walking with her makeshift crutches digging into her underarms, and messenger bag banging against her hip, she was cursing her stepmother with each limping step. Not that Cinder was in any big hurry to get home. She couldn't imagine what preparations she could assist Pearl with, but she didn't doubt they would be designed to torture her. One more evening of servitude. One more evening. The words propelled her on. When she finally reached the apartment, she found the hallways eerily quiet. Everyone was either down at the festival or getting ready for the ball. The shouts that could normally be heard behind closed doors had been swapped for girlish laughter. Cinder tucked the crutches beneath her sore arms and used the wall to guide her to the door. The apartment seemed empty as she entered it, but she could hear the floors creaking as Adrian and Pearl moved around their bedrooms toward the back. Hoping she might be able to make it through the whole evening without seeing either of them, Cinder hobbled to her small room and closed the door behind her. She had just thought to start packing in earnest when someone knocked at her door. Sighing, she opened it. Pearl was in the hallway, wearing her golden gown, all silk and seeded pearls and a neckline that plunged, just how Adrian had requested it. "Could you have come home any slower?" she said. "We'll be leaving as soon as the coronation is over." "Well, I'm sure I could have come home faster, except someone stole my foot." Pearl glared briefly, then stepped back into the hallway and did a half spin, letting the skirt billow around her ankles. "What do you think, Cinder? Will the prince notice me in this?" Cinder barely restrained the urge to slime her own filthy hands over the dress. Instead, she peeled off her work gloves and tucked them back into the pocket. "Is there something you needed?" "Yes, actually. I wanted to ask your opinion." Pearl hitched up her skirt to reveal mismatched shoes on her tiny feet. On her left foot was a small velvet boot the color of fresh milk that laced up her ankle. On her right foot was a gold sandal tied with sparkling ribbons and tiny heart-shaped charms. "Given that you're so close to the prince, I thought I would ask you if you think he would prefer the gold slippers or the white." Cinder presented to think. "The boots make your ankles look fat." Pearl smirked. "The metal plating makes your ankle look fat. You're just jealous because I have such lovely feet." She sighed in mock sympathy. "What a shame you'll never know the pleasure." "I'm just glad you found at least one body part that's lovely." Pearl tossed her hair, a smug grin on her face. She knew that Cinder's jest had no grounding, and Cinder was irritated when the low insult brought her no pleasure. "I've been rehearsing my conversation with Prince Kai," said Pearl. "Of course, I intend to tell him everything." She swayed so her skirt caught the light. "First, I'm going to tell him all about your ugly metal extremities, and how much of an embarrassment you are, and what a disgusting creature they turned you into. And I'm going to make sure he also realizes how much more desirable I am." Cinder leaned against the doorframe. "I wish I would have known about this little crush of yours earlier, Pearl. You know, before she passed away, I was able to obtain a promise from His Highness that he would dance with Peony tonight. I could have asked the same for you, but I guess it's too late for that now. Shame." Pearl's face flushed. "You shouldn't even say her name," she said, her voice a harsh whisper. Cinder blinked. "Peony?" The anger in Pearl's eyes grew intense, overtaking the childish taunts. "I know you killed her. Everyone knows it was your fault." Cinder gaped at her, unbalanced by the sudden switch from the immature boasts. "That's not true. I never got sick." "It's your fault she was at the junkyard. That's where she caught it." Cinder opened her mouth, but her jaw just hung. "If it wasn't for you, she would be going to the ball tonight, so don't try to pretend like you could have done her any favors. The best thing you could have done for Peony would have been to leave her alone. Then maybe she'd still be here." Tears were pooling in Pearl's eyes. "And you try to pretend like you cared about her, like she was your sister, and that's not fair. She was sick and you were meeting the prince, trying to catch his attention when you know about how she felt about him. It's sick." Cinder folded her arms, protecting herself. "I know you don't believe this, but I really did love Peony. I do love her." Pearl sniffed once loudly, as if to stop the crying before it could overtake her. "You're right. I don't believe you. You're a liar and a thief, and you don't care about anyone but yourself." She paused. "And I'm going to make sure the prince knows it." The door to Audrey's bedroom opened, and she stepped out, wearing a white and magenta kimono embroidered with elegant cranes. "What are you two bickering about now? Pearl, are you ready to go?" She eyed Pearl with a shrewd eye, trying to determine if anything still needed work. "I can't believe you're going," said Cinder. What will people think when you're still in mourning? She knew it was a button she shouldn't push, an unfair comment when she'd heard them both crying through the thin walls. But she was not in a mood to be fair. Even if she'd had a choice, she wouldn't have gone. Not without Peony. Audrey fixed a cold glare on her, lips pulled taut. The coronation is starting, she said. Go wash the hover. I want it to look brand new. Glad she wouldn't be forced to sit through the coronation with them, Cinder made no argument as she grabbed her crutches and headed back for the door. One more evening. She turned on her netlink as soon as she reached the elevator, delegating the coronation proceedings to a corner of her vision. It was still the pre-ceremony. A parade of government officials was marching into the palace, swarmed by a sea of journalists and cameras. She picked up a bucket and soap in the storage room before hobbling toward the parking garage, half listening as the newscaster explained the symbolism behind the different elements of the coronation. The embroidery on Kai's robe, the designs in the crest that would be raised when he took his vows, the number of times the gong would be struck when he ascended to the dais, all practices that had been around for centuries, cobbled together from the many cultures that had come together to form the Commonwealth. The news continuously switched between the festival and the city center, to the occasional shot of Kai during his preparations. Only these latter bits snagged Cinder's attention away from the bucket of sudsy water. She couldn't help imagining she was in the palace with him, rather than this dim, cool garage. Kai shaking hands with some unknown delegate. Kai greeting the crowd. Kai trying to steal a private conversation with his advisor. Kai turning toward her, smiling at her, glad she was by his side. The momentary glimpses of him made Cinder's heart feel soothed, rather than injured. It was a reminder that much bigger things were happening in the world, and Cinder's yearning for freedom, and Pearl's taunts, and Audrey's whims, and even Kai's flirting with her, did not fit in the bigger picture. The Eastern Commonwealth was crowning its new emperor. Today, the whole world was watching. Kai's clothing blended old and new traditions. Turtle doves embroidered around his mandarin collar signified peace and love. Draped over his shoulders was a midnight blue cloak embroidered with 6 silver stars, signifying the peace and unity of the 6 earthen kingdoms, and a dozen chrysanthemums, signifying the 12 provinces of the Commonwealth and how they would flourish under his reign. A royal advisor stood beside Kai on the platform. The first rows of the crowd were made up of government officials from every branch of the province, but Cinder's eyes were always drawn back to Kai, magnetically latching onto him again and again. Then a small entourage came down one of the aisles, the last to take their seats. Queen Lavanna, along with the 2 thaumaturges. The queen was wearing a delicate white veil that draped to her elbows, hiding her face and making her look more like a phantom than a royal guest. Cinder shivered. She didn't think any Lunars had ever been present at a Commonwealth coronation. Rather than making her feel hopeful for the future, the sight filled Cinder with a lump of anxiety, because Lavanna's haughty stance suggested that she belonged there more than any of the earthen citizens, as if she were the one about to be coronated. The queen and her entourage claimed their reserved seats in the first row. Those seated around them tried, unsuccessfully, to hide their distaste at being so close to her. Cinder pulled the sopping rag from the bucket and put her apprehension to work, scrubbing Audrey's hover to a fine gleam. The coronation began with a thunder of drums. Prince Kai kneeled on a silk-covered platform as a slow parade of men and women passed before him, each dropping a ribbon or a medallion or jewel around his neck. Each was a symbolic gift: long life, wisdom, goodness of heart, generosity, patience, joy. When all of the necklaces had been placed on him, the camera zoomed in on Kai's face. He appeared surprisingly serene, his eyes lowered, but his head held high. As was customary, a representative from one of the other 5 earthen kingdoms had been selected to officiate the coronation, in order to show that the other countries would honor and respect the new sovereign's right to govern. They had selected the European Federation's Prime Minister Bromstad, a tall blond man with broad shoulders. Cinder had always thought he looked more like a farmer than a politician. He held out an old-fashioned paper scroll that contained all the promises Kai was making to his people when he accepted the role of emperor. As both of the prime minister's hands gripped either end of the scroll, he spoke a series of vows, and Kai repeated after him. I solemnly swear to govern the peoples of the Eastern Commonwealth according to the laws and customs as laid down by generations of past rulers, he recited. I will use all the power bestowed on me to further justice, to be merciful, to honor the inherent rights of all peoples, to respect the peace between all nations, to rule with kindness and patience, and to seek the wisdom and counsel of my peers and brethren. All this I promise to do today, and for all the days of my reign, before all the witnesses of the earth and heavens. Cinder's heart swelled as she scrubbed the hood. She had never seen Kai look so serious, or so handsome. She feared for him for a bit, knowing how nervous he must be, but in that moment he was not the prince who had brought a broken android to the market or almost kissed her in an elevator. He was her emperor. Prime Minister Bromstad lifted his chin. I hereby proclaim you Emperor Cato of the Eastern Commonwealth. Long live his imperial majesty. The crowd burst into cheers and animated chants of Long live the Emperor as Kai turned to face his people. If he were happy at his raised position, it was impossible to tell. His lips were neutral, his gaze reserved as he stood on the dais, and the applause of the crowd surged around him. After a long moment of his own serenity clashing with the tornado of praise, a podium was brought to the stage for the Emperor's first address. The crowd quieted. Cinder dashed water over the vehicle. Kai stood expressionless for a moment, staring at the edge of the platform, his fingers gripping the podium's sides. I am honored, he began, that my coronation coincides with our most revered holiday. 126 years ago, the nightmare and catastrophe that was the Fourth World War ended, and the Eastern Commonwealth was born. It grew out of the unification of many peoples, many cultures, many ideals. It was strengthened by a single enduring belief that together, we as one people are strong. We have the ability to love each other, no matter our differences, to help each other, no matter our weaknesses. We chose peace over war, life over death. We chose to crown one man to be our sovereign, to guide us, to uphold us, not to rule, but to serve. He paused. Cinder pulled her focus away from the retina display long enough to give the hover a quick inspection. It was too dark to tell if she'd done a decent job, but she had lost interest in perfection. Content, she dropped the wet rag into the bucket and sank against the concrete wall behind a row of parked hovers, giving the tiny screen her full attention. I am the great-great-great-grandson of the first emperor of the Commonwealth, Kai continued. Since his time, our world has changed. We continue to face new problems, new heartaches. Though a war between men has not been fought on earth and soil in 126 years, we now fight a new battle. My father was fighting a war against Lutmosis, the pestilence that has ravaged our planet for over a dozen years. This disease has brought death and suffering to our doorstep. The good people of the Commonwealth and all our earthen siblings have lost friends, family, loved ones, neighbors. And with these losses, we face the loss of trade and commerce, a downturn of economy, worsened living conditions. Some have gone without food because there are not enough farmers to toil the land. Some have gone without heat as our energy supplies dwindle. This is the war we now face. This is the war my father was determined to end, and I now vow to take up that torch. Together we will find a cure for this disease. We will defeat it, and we will return our great country to its former splendor. The audience applauded, but Kai showed no sign of joy at his words. His expression was resigned, dark. It would be naive of me, he said when the audience had quieted, not to mention a second kind of conflict, one no less deadly. The crowd wrestled. Cinder leaned her head back against the cold wall. As I am sure you are all aware, the relationship between the allied earthen nations and Luna has been strained for many generations. As I am sure you are also aware, the sovereign of Luna, Her Majesty Queen Livana, has honored us with her presence for this past week. She is the first lunar sovereign to step foot on Earth for almost a century, and her presence indicates hope at a time of true peace between us is fast approaching. The screen panned out, showing Queen Livana in the front row. Her milky hands were folded demurely in her lap, as if she were humbled by the recognition. Cinder was sure she fooled no one. My father spent the last years of his life in discussion with Her Majesty, in hopes of seeing an alliance to fruition. He did not live to see the result of those discussions, but I am determined that his efforts will live on in me. It is true there have been obstacles in this road to peace, that we have had difficulties finding a common ground with Luna, a solution that would serve both parties, but I have not given hope that a resolution can be found. He took a breath, then paused with his lips still parted. His gaze dropped down to the podium, his fingers locked around the edges. Cinder leaned forward as if she could get a closer look at the prince as he struggled with his next words. I will. He paused again, straightened, and focused his eyes on some distant, invisible point. I will do whatever needs to be done to ensure the well-being of my country. I will do whatever needs to be done to keep you all safe. This is my promise. He peeled his hands from the podium and walked off before the crowd could think to applaud, leaving a sprinkle of concerned but polite clapping behind him. Cinder's heart strangled her as the screen allowed another glimpse of the Lunars in the front row. The veil may have hidden the Queen's conceit, but the smug grins on her two attendants could not be mistaken. They believed they had won. Chapter 32. Cinder waited half an hour before limping back to the elevator. The apartment building had come to life again. She kept herself plastered to the wall, crutches tucked behind her, as her neighbors danced by in their fine clothes. A few pitying glances turned on Cinder, but she kept out of the way, careful not to smudge any of the beautiful dresses, but mostly her neighbors ignored her. Making it to the apartment, she shut the door behind her and listened for a moment to the blissful emptiness of the living room. She ran a mental checklist of everything she wanted to grab, green text scrolling across her vision. In her room, Cinder spread out her blanket and filled it with her few belongings: oil-stained clothes, tools that had never made their way back to the toolbox, silly little gifts that Eco had given her over the years, like a gold ring that was actually a rusted washer. Both Eco's personality chip and Peony's ID chip were tucked safely in her calf compartment, where they would stay until she found a more permanent home for them. She shut her eyes, suddenly tired. How was it that with freedom so close on the horizon, she suddenly had the overwhelming desire to lie down and take a nap? All those long nights fixing the car were catching up with her. Shaking off the feeling, she finished packing as fast as she could, trying her best not to think of the risks she was taking. She would be considered a runaway cyborg for real this time. If she were ever caught, Adri could have her imprisoned. She kept her hands moving, trying not to think of Eco, who should have been at her side, or Peony, who should have made her want to stay, or Prince Kai, Emperor Kai. She would never see him again. She knotted the blanket corners with an angry tug. She was thinking too much. She just had to leave. One step at a time, and soon she would be in the car, and all this would be behind her. Settling her makeshift bag over her shoulder, she hobbled her way back down the hall into the labyrinth of underground storage spaces. Limping into the storage room, she dropped the bag on the floor. She paused only for a moment to catch her breath before she continued, unlatching the top of the handheld toolbox and shoveling everything off the desk onto it. There would be time for sorting later. The standing toolbox that came nearly to her chest was much too big to fit in the car and would have to be left behind. Her gas mileage would have been ruined with all that weight in the back anyway. She surveyed the room where she'd spent most of the past 5 years. It was the closest thing to a home she'd ever known, even with the chicken wire that felt like a cage and the boxes that smelled of mildew. She didn't expect to miss it much. Peony's crumpled ball gown was still draped over the welder. It, like the toolbox, wouldn't be coming with her. She moved to the towering steel shelves against the far wall and began rummaging for parts that would be useful for the car or even her own body should anything malfunction, throwing the pieces of miscellaneous junk into a heap on the floor. She paused as her hand stumbled across something she'd never thought she would see again: the small, battered foot of an 11-year-old cyborg. She lifted it from the shelf where it had been tucked out of sight. Eco must have saved it, even after Cinder had asked her to throw it away. Perhaps in Eco's mind it was the closest thing to an android shoe she would ever own. Cinder cradled the foot against her heart. How she had hated this foot. How overjoyed she was to see it now. With an ironic smile, she slumped into her desk chair for the last time. Pulling off her gloves, she eyed her left wrist, trying to picture the small chip just beneath the surface. The thought brought Peony to mind. Her blue-tipped fingers, the scalpel against her pale white skin. Cinder shut her eyes, forcing the memory away. She had to do this. She reached for the utility knife on the corner of her desk, the blade soaking in a tin can filled with alcohol. She shook it off, took a deep breath, and rested her cyborg hand palm up on the desk. She recalled seeing the chip on Dr. Erlin's holograph less than an inch away from where skin met metal. The challenge would be getting it out without accidentally splicing any important wires. Forcing her mind to quiet, her hand to still, she pressed the blade into her wrist. The pain bit into her, but she didn't flinch. Steady, steady. A beep startled her. Cinder jumped, pulling the blade away and spinning around to face the wall of shelving. Her heart pummeled against her ribs as she scanned all the parts and tools that would be left behind. It beeped again. Cinder's eyes dropped to the old net screen that was still propped against the shelves. She knew it was disconnected from the net, and yet a bright blue square was flashing in the corner. Another beep. Setting down the knife, Cinder slinked away from the chair and knelt before the screen. On the blue square was scrawled, "Direct link request received from unknown. User, accept?" Tilting her head, she spotted the decom chip still inserted in the screen's drive. The small green light beside it glowed. In the shadow of the screen, it looked like any other chip, but Cinder remembered Kai's response when she described the chip's shimmery silver metal. A lunar chip. She grabbed a dirty rag from the pile of junk and pressed it against the barely bleeding wound. Screen, accept link. The beeping stopped. The blue box disappeared. A spiral turned over on the screen. Hello? Cinder jumped. Hello? Hello? Hello, is anybody there? Whoever she was, she sounded on the verge of a breakdown. Please, oh please, someone answer. Where's that stupid android? Hello? Hello? Cinder leaned in toward the screen. The girls gasped, followed by a short silence. Hello? Can you hear me? Is somebody? Yes, I can hear you. Hold on, something's wrong with the vid cable. Oh, thank heavens, the voice said as Cinder set aside the rag. She set the screen face down on the concrete and opened the door to its control panel. I thought maybe the chip had gotten damaged, or I'd programmed it with the wrong connection ID or something. Are you in the palace now? Cinder found the vid cable disconnected from its plug. It must have come loose when Adri knocked it off the wall. Cinder screwed it in, and a flood of blue light splattered against the floor. There we are, she said, righting the screen. She jolted back when she saw the girl on the other side of the connection. She must have been close to Cinder's age and had the longest, waviest, most unruly mess of tangled blonde hair imaginable. The golden nest around her head was tied in a big knot over one shoulder and cascaded in a jumble of braids and snarls, wrapping around one of the girl's arms before descending out of the screen's view. The girl was fidgeting with the ends, reverently winding and unwinding them around her fingers. If it weren't for the mess of hair, she would have been pretty. She had a sweet heart-shaped face, giant sky-blue eyes, and a sprinkle of freckles across her nose. She was somehow not at all what Cinder had been expecting. The girl looked equally surprised at seeing Cinder and her cyborg hand and dreary shirt. Who are you? The girl asked. Her eyes darted behind Cinder, taking in the dim lighting and the chicken wire. Why aren't you at the palace? I wasn't allowed to go, Cinder answered. She squinted at the room behind the girl, wondering if she were looking at a home on the moon, but it did not look at any home at all. Rather, the girl was surrounded by metal walls and machines and screens and computers, and more controls and buttons and lights than a cargo ship's cockpit. Cinder folded her legs, letting her footless calf dangle more comfortably over her thigh. Are you lunar? The girl's eyes fluttered, as if caught off guard by the question. Instead of answering, she leaned forward. I need to speak with someone at the new Beijing Palace right away. Then why don't you calm the Palace Information Board? I can't! The girl's shriek was so unexpected, so desperate that Cinder narrowly fell over. I don't have a global comm chip. This is the only direct link I've ever been able to get down to Earth. So you are lunar. The girl's eyes widened into near-perfect circles. That's not... Who are you? Said Cinder, her voice raising. Are you working for the Queen? Are you the one who installed the chip in that android? You are, aren't you? The girl's eyebrows drew together, but rather than looking irritated at Cinder's questions, she appeared frightened, even ashamed. Cinder clenched her jaw against the onslaught of questions and took in a slow breath before asking steadily, Are you a lunar spy? No, of course not. I mean, well, sort of. Sort of? What do you mean? Please, listen to me. The girl clenched her hands together as if fighting an internal battle. Yes, I programmed the chip, and I am working for the Queen, but it's not what you think. I programmed all the spyware that Levana's used to watch Emperor Rakan these past months, but I didn't have a choice. Mistress would kill me if... Stars above. She will kill me when she finds out about this. Mistress? Who? You mean Queen Levana? The girl squeezed her eyes tight, her face contorted with pain. When she opened her eyes again, they were glistening. No, Mistress Sybil. She is Her Majesty's head thermatage, and my guardian. Recognition pinged in Cinder's head. Kai had suspected the Queen's thermatage of putting the chip in Asani in the first place. But she's more like a captor, really, the girl continued. I'm nothing to her but a prisoner and a slave. She hiccuped on the last word and buried her face in a bundle of hair, sobbing. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm an evil, worthless, wretched girl. Cinder felt her heart tug in sympathy. She could relate to being a slave for her guardian, but she couldn't recall ever being afraid that Adri might actually kill her. Well, other than that time she sold her off for plague research. She clenched her jaw against the mounting pity, reminding herself that this girl was lunar. She had helped Queen Levana spy on Emperor Rakan and on Kai. She briefly wondered if the girl was only manipulating her emotions now, before she remembered that lunars couldn't control people through the net screens. Blowing some hair out of her face, Cinder leaned forward and yelled, Stop it! Stop crying! The crying stopped. The girl peered up at her with big, watery eyes. Why are you trying to get hold of a palace? The girl shrank back and sobbed, but the tears seemed to have been startled out of her. I need to get a message to Emperor Kai. I need to warn him. He's in danger, all of Earth, Queen Levana, and it's my fault. If I'd only been stronger, if I'd only tried to fight, this wouldn't have happened. It's all my fault. Stars above, would you stop crying? said Cinder before the girl could dissolve into hysterics again. "You need to get a hold of yourself. What do you mean Kai's in danger? What have you done?" The girl hugged herself, her eyes pleading with Cinder, as if she alone could offer forgiveness. "I'm the Queen's programmer, like I said. I'm good at it. Hacking into netlinks and security systems and the like." She said this without a hint of arrogance on her wavering voice. "For the last few years, Mistress has been asking me to connect feeds from Earth's political leaders to Her Majesty's palace. At first, it was just court discussions, meetings, document transfers, nothing very interesting. Her Majesty wasn't learning anything that your Emperor hadn't already told her, so I didn't think much harm could come of it." The girl twisted her hair around both sets of knuckles. "But then she asked me to program a decom chip that she could install on one of the royal androids, thinking she could spy on the Emperor outside of the netlinks." She raised her eyes to Cinder. Guilt was scrawled across her face. If it had been any other android, any android in the entire palace, she still wouldn't know anything. But now she does know, and it's my fault. She whimpered and pulled the lock of hair into her mouth like a gag. "Wait!" Cinder held up her hand, trying to slow the girl's rapid words. "What exactly does Levana know?" The girl pulled hair out as tears started to slip down her cheeks. "She knows everything that android knew, everything she'd been researching. She knows that Princess Celine is alive and that that Emperor Kai was searching for her. She knows that the Emperor wanted to find the princess and instate her as the true Lunar Queen." Dread squirmed in Cinder's stomach. "She knows the names of the doctors who help her escape and this poor old woman in the European Federation who housed her for so long. Her Majesty's already sent people to hunt her down, using the information Kai had, and when they find her—" "But what will she do to Kai?" Cinder interrupted. "Levana's already won. Kai all but said he was going to give her what she wants, so what does it matter now?" "He tried to usurp her. You don't know the Queen, her grudges. She'll never forgive this. I have to get a message to him, to somebody at the palace. He has to know that it's a setup." "A setup? What kind of setup?" "To become Empress. Once she's in control of the Commonwealth, she intends to use her army to wage war on the rest of Earth. And she can do it. Her army. This army." She shuddered, ducking her head as if someone had swiped at her. Cinder shook her head. "Kai wouldn't allow it." "It doesn't matter. When she's Empress, she'll have no more use of him." Blood rushed to Cinder's ears. "You'd think, but she would be an idiot to try and kill him. Everyone would know it was her. Lunars suspect that she killed Queen Channery and Princess Celine, but what can they do about it? They might think of rebelling, but as soon as they're in her presence, she brainwashes them into compliance again." Cinder rubbed her fingers over her brow. "He was going to announce it at the ball tonight," she murmured to herself. "He's going to announce his intent to marry her." Her heart was racing, her thoughts spilling over in her brain. Levana knew he had been searching for Princess Celine. She would kill him. She would take over the Commonwealth. She would wage war on the whole planet. She grasped her head as the world spun around her. She had to warn him. She couldn't let him make the announcement. She could send him a comm, but what were the chances he was checking them during the ball? The ball. Cinder peered down at her drab clothes, her empty ankle. Peony's dress. The old foot that Eco had saved. The silk gloves. Her head bobbed before she knew what she was agreeing to, and she used the shelves to pull herself to standing. "I'll go," she muttered. "I'll find him." "Take the chip," said the girl on the screen, "in case we need to contact each other. And please, don't tell them about me. If my mistress ever found out—" Without waiting for her to finish, Cinder bent over and pulled the chip from its drive. The screen went black. And that is the end of chapter 32. Join us tomorrow for chapter 33.